Autumn 1940, on a track at Brickendonbury House in Hertfordshire, a car rolls past a tree line while men in plain clothes wait for a gap in its movement. The object in one hand is too small to look like a weapon, and too ordinary to explain why everyone watching keeps their distance. The film record shows a charge going under a vehicle and then coming back out again, but the real point of the test is not the rehearsal that day. The real point is what this method would become when the same idea crossed the channel and disappeared into occupied streets. Imperial War Museums catalogued that 16mm test film as SOE sabotage trials at Station 17, including methods of attaching charges to cars and an improvised charge with a time pencil on a fuel tank. The same film description also records an improvised clam charge made from PE, a time pencil and magnets, with repeated attempts to place it under a moving or stationary car. What looks improvised in the footage is the beginning of a very specific British sabotage solution. It was a solution for a problem that conventional raiding methods handled badly behind German lines. SOE needed damage without a firefight, and delay without a man waiting beside the target. The requirement sounds simple in a memo, but it becomes much harder beside a parked truck, a rail wagon, or a generator under guard. A saboteur could not carry naval-sized mines through a checkpoint, and could not spend minutes wiring a bulky charge beneath a vehicle. A pocket device was needed, but it still had to attach fast, hold on steel, and give time for escape. That combination of concealment, attachment, and delayed firing is what drove the magnetic petrol tank bomb concept, and then the Clam. Armourer's Bench, using IWM footage and SOE references, describes that early magnetic petrol tank bomb as a small PE block with magnets and a switch number 10 time pencil, later evolving into the pocket-sized Clam mine. The logic of the device was operational before it was elegant. The charge had to be placed in a few seconds, often by touch, and then left to work without further handling. Magnetism solved the first part because it replaced straps, tape, or wire on suitable surfaces. The delay switch solved the second part because the operator could leave before the explosion and never return to the target. The number 10 time pencil was a slim delay switch built for demolition charges, and IWM's collection note explicitly ties it to clandestine use by SOE, content reference, Waysite, Index CS3. IWM also records one number 10 example at 130mm long and 11mm in diameter, with a yellow strip indicating a 6-hour 30-minute delay on that specimen. In post-war technical description, the time pencil works by crushing a small vial of corrosive liquid, so the liquid attacks a retaining wire holding back a spring-loaded striker. When the wire fails, the striker hits a percussion cap and initiates the train to the detonator or fuse. British technical handling notes stressed inspection holes, correct crimping, and immediate arming status once the safety bar was withdrawn. The same notes warned operators not to leave the coloured safety strip behind because it could reveal the delay time to the enemy. The Clam itself took the same principle and packed it into a purpose-built sabotage body. Armourer's Bench describes the Clam's evolution through multiple marks, with early stamped sheet metal and later Mark III Bakelite casing, each built around a compact rectangular magnetic charge. The IWM object label for a Clam-associated display states that the bomb contained 1/2 pound of plastic explosive and used magnets in its base for concealment in machinery or vehicles. Content reference, Waysite. Index Stenrule. Armourer's Bench gives the Mark III filler as 8 ounces, which matches that 1/2 pound figure and notes the charge could be initiated by a time pencil or an L delay fuse with a number 27 detonator. The same source gives the pocket dimensions at roughly 5.75 by 2.75 by 1.5 inches, which is small enough to explain why SOE treated concealment as a design feature rather than a side benefit. The US. Navy bomb disposal. Technical summary of the British Clam. Mark III also describes a plastic box body with 2 magnets and an internal explosive filling, plus a detonator and Cortex lead arrangement. In that summary, the Clam Mark III entry is specifically described with a number 9L delay switch setup, which suggests that fielded configurations and training usage could vary by mark and by task, even if the time pencil remained central to the concept lineage. That variation matters because the sabotage problem itself varied. A petrol tank required one kind of effect, a crankcase or cylinder block required another, a rail target required another again. SOE training material preserved in the wartime syllabus makes that targeting logic unusually clear. In the road transport section, the instruction states that the most effective way to destroy a car or truck is a one-cartridge magnet charge on top of the petrol tank, and if that is impossible, the operator should place a clam on the cylinder block. For diesel military vehicles, the same syllabus directs placement of the clam on the crankcase instead. Elsewhere in the same syllabus, clam charges are also named for use against multiple explosive dumps, and the document repeatedly frames sabotage as delay of transport and machinery rather than spectacle. That is the core of the story, and it explains why the device stayed obscure. It was built to break movement, not to announce itself. Its best results looked like mechanical failure to anyone arriving after the fact. Its strongest proof often sat in workshop notes, training instructions and damaged machinery rather than in frontline battle reports. The design question was never how to make the biggest explosion. The design question was how to make a small explosion land exactly where a machine could not ignore it. That question shaped every detail from the magnets to the delay colours. The number 10 time pencil was issued in different delay ranges identified by colour, and US technical notes show those timings shifted with temperature, with a quoted variation of roughly 25% either way for listed delays. The number 9L delay switch used in other British sabotage charges had its own temperature correction table, and an even wider stated accuracy band of plus or minus 30%. Neither device behaved like a modern countdown clock. Both required selecting the delay against expected temperature and then accepting uncertainty as part of the trade. That trade was acceptable because the alternative was often no access at all. A 1-minute perfect timer is less useful than a 6-hour imperfect one if the target is behind a guarded fence and a curfew. British technical notes also state that the number 10 device was issued only for special operations and preparatory training for those operations, which is a quiet indication of the control and handling burden attached to it. Content reference, or site, SACU, Index 20EM. The handling burden was real because the operator carried a live initiation problem in a coat pocket. The number 10 instructions warned that the switch could not be safely disarmed once in use, except by interrupting the fuse path or reinserting a safety bar under controlled conditions. The number 9L delay notes are similarly blunt and call safe disarming impossible, advising separation from the charge if diffusing is essential. The manuals also recommend using 2 delay switches on important charges to guard against failure. They were clever, but they were never treated as infallible. A redundancy was a way to keep a mission from collapsing because one small wire corroded too slowly in cold air. This is where the clam becomes more interesting than a museum object. Its compact shape was not only about hiding the charge, it was about shortening exposure time at the target. The IWM film record shows men practicing several approaches to the same car, including placement from concealment and even a brief perch on the rear bumper of a moving vehicle. The most dangerous seconds were the seconds before the magnet touched steel. Once the charge seated, the device became a timing problem. Before it seated, the operator was just another body in range of a shouted warning or a headlamp sweep. The film also shows the charge being retrieved during demonstrations, and which is important because it underlines how much of SOE's early work was iterative technique rather than a finished drill. Content reference, or site. Index 25. Placement angle, surface shape, bodywork clearance and escape route all had to be practiced before this could become a field habit. Armourer's Bench notes that the 1940 IWM footage was filmed at Station 17 and links the demonstration lineage to later references from Station 12, including a June 1942 visit where a small magnet charge on a car petrol tank was one of the scheduled effects shown to senior British and American figures. The clam was not a random field trick. It was the packaged form of a repeated idea. A magnet charge needs magnetic metal and enough flat or stable contact to hold. It is less useful on non-ferrous components, awkward curves or surfaces that force slow placement under stress. A small sabotage charge can cripple a vehicle or machine, but exact damage depends on where it lands, what material sits beneath it, and whether fuel or moving parts amplify the blast. British and post-war technical descriptions make that point indirectly by prescribing target-specific placement rather than one universal sticking point. The doctrine aimed at vulnerable systems, not random panels. Cylinder blocks, crankcases, fuel tanks, and rail steel are named because they turn a small charge into a larger effect. The clam's reputation rests on that precision of placement more than on raw explosive weight. The proof detail in the technical literature is restrained but telling. The US Technical Handbook notes that the Clam's charge could hold mild steel plate up to about 3/4 of an inch, which helps explain why SOE doctrine pushed operators toward engine and machinery targets rather than bodywork. It is a bench statement of what the charge could do under favourable contact and orientation. In practice, sabotage teams worked under darkness, movement, weather, and fear. Those conditions turn every neat test number into a probability. The IWM film description does not present one perfect sequence. It presents repeated attempts with different men, different approaches, and a device that is shown, placed, removed, and placed again. Content reference: OE site, Index 29. The method had to be teachable because the field would not forgive hesitation. SOE's syllabus language reads the same way. It is not romantic and it is not vague. It tells trainees where to put the charge on a truck, where to put it on a diesel, and when a fuel target is easier than a buried tank. It even distinguishes where an ordinary 1-pound high-explosive charge is sufficient on mobile fuel wagons and Bowsers, which shows that the Clam sat within a larger toolbox, rather than replacing every other sabotage method. SOE sabotage was a system of devices, fuse, drills, and target selection, and the Clam was one of the most practical pieces in that system. It did not need to be dramatic in every mission to be valuable. It needed to be small, reliable enough, and fast to place. When it succeeded, the visible result could look accidental to anyone not trained to read blast signatures. When it failed, the failure might be timing drift, poor seating, poor target choice, or a detonator train problem that left little public record. The manuals anticipated that uncertainty long before historians described it. The mid-story danger in the Clam is often imagined as the explosion, but the archival evidence points to a different danger. The most immediate risk sat in the handling sequence and the approach to the vehicle. The IWM film's moving car placement drill, including a man briefly riding the rear bumper while placing a device, shows how narrow the margin could be when concealment and timing had to coexist. The manuals add a quieter version of the same threat. One bad switch check could arm the delay with a false assumption about the striker position. One wrong delay choice could bring detonation forward in warmer conditions or push it late in colder air. One discarded safety strip could tell the finder how long remained. None of those risks looked cinematic on a bench. All of them became cinematic in the field. The first operational reality for a device like this was not a famous named raid. It was routine sabotage against transport and machinery in occupied territory, often conducted by local circuits and trained teams, whose reports were brief, coded, or absorbed into wider disruption accounts. That is why the most explicit surviving instructions often come from training syllabi and technical summaries, rather than decorated battlefield narratives. The SOE syllabus line about road transport is especially revealing because it ties the Clam directly to engine and crankcase attack, rather than treating it as a generic bomb. The line about placing a magnet charge on top of the petrol tank when possible also preserves the earlier concept that the IWM film demonstrates in 1940. The continuity from improvised magnetic petrol tank charge to pocket Clam is not just a collector's story. It is visible in the way the target logic remains the same across film, object labels, and training language. Fuel, engines, rails, and machinery are the recurring words. Speed of placement and delayed departure are the recurring method. Compactness is the recurring constraint. Armourer's bench explicitly notes that the Mark III was nondescript enough not to draw attention and small enough for pocket carry. That is a tactical feature in occupied cities, where attention itself is lethal. That makes the surviving object and film records unusually important. EWM's film record preserves the test environment and the movement drills. EWM's object records preserve the physical associations, including the Clam label, tying half-pound plastic explosive and magnetic concealment to machinery and vehicles, and the number 10 switch note tying the delay device to clandestine SOEUs. Content reference: OE site. Index 37. The US NBD manual preserves the hard language of dimensions, switch behavior, timing variation, and explosive fittings. The SOE syllabus preserves the attack logic and target selection that turned the hardware into sabotage results. The Clam's balanced record follows from that character. It was highly effective when it reached the right metal in the right place with the right delay chosen for the conditions. It was limited by surface geometry, target access, switch variability, and the human cost of the approach. It was dangerous to handle badly and unforgiving of rushed preparation. It required the operator to know machines, not just explosives. A pocket sabotage chain only works when charges, detonators, and delay switches arrive together. A missing switch is not a minor delay in that chain. It is a failed mission. That is why the technical paperwork is so procedural, and why the training language is so direct. The manuals were trying to make a small clandestine tool behave predictably enough to be trusted by people who would use it once and then disappear. The cost of failure was not only a damaged target left intact. The cost could be an exposed route, a captured courier, or a compromised circuit after a charge was discovered before detonation. The warning about not leaving the coloured safety strip behind belongs in that context, because even scraps were intelligence in a counter-sabotage war. The Clam was built for that contest of timing, concealment, and traces. It did not need to win a battle line. It needed to turn a truck, a rail section, a generator pedestal, or a fuel point into a repair problem at the wrong hour. The SOE syllabus repeatedly frames transport disruption in exactly those terms of delay, blockage, and compounded interference, which is the strategic scale hidden inside a pocket charge. The device also carried a paradox that explains its long obscurity. The better it worked, the less likely it was to be seen as a named weapon afterward. A broken crankcase and a burned fuel tank do not advertise the form factor that caused them. They advertise interruption. That was enough. By the time post-war intelligence and museum collections fixed names to components, the Clam had already done the kind of work that leaves thin headlines and thick maintenance logs. Even the surviving 1940 footage feels like a rehearsal for a war of absences. Men appear from trees, touch metal, and disappear. The car keeps moving for a moment and then the scene cuts away. What matters is delayed. Returning to that woodland track at Brickendonbury gives the device its full meaning. The observers in the film were not watching a finished weapon demonstration alone. They were watching an operating method being refined for occupied Europe. The magnets were the visible trick. The delay switch was the hidden argument. Together they let a saboteur separate presence from effect. That separation is what made the Clam valuable. It looked like a small box, but it functioned like a timed attack on mobility. Its engineering was not advanced in the modern sense, but it was exact in the way wartime sabotage demanded. A bakelite body, a half-pound filling, 2 magnets, a detonator train, and a delay switch were enough if they reached the correct metal. Content reference: OESite. Index 42. The measured consequence was compact and brutal. In a case roughly 5.75 inches long with an 8-ounce filler, the Clam concentrated enough force that technical literature credited it with holing mild steel plate up to about 3/4 of an inch under proper conditions. The operational cost was paid in approach distance, cold hands, uncertain delays, and seconds spent under machines that could start moving without warning. The Clam turned a pocket into a sabotage workshop.